elite cave diver, became trapped inside a narrow underwater cave, surrounded by clouds of stirred-up silt. He could no longer find the exit. He could only swim around blindly in the darkness. As the gas in his tank kept running lower, fear and panic quickly set in. The only people who could save him were his teammates. Fortunately, his teammates were not far away, but what no one expected was that one of them had become tightly entangled in the guideline. In this life-or-death moment, could they make it out alive? And this is the story of the Eagle's Nest sinkhole diving incident in the United States. Deep within the dense forests of Hernando County, Florida, lies a pond that looks completely ordinary. The water is murky, and the edges are covered in thick algae. Anyone passing by would never give it a second glance. But beneath this unremarkable pond, hidden beneath it is one of the deadliest underground labyrinths in the global cave diving world, the Eagle's Nest sinkhole. About 21 meters below the surface, a narrow vertical passage known as the chimney drops straight down into the darkness. Once through this tight shaft, you enter a gigantic underwater chamber. Divers named it the ballroom. It is the largest explored underwater cave system in Florida. From the ballroom, the cave stretches outward in multiple directions, forming more than 1,700 meters of submerged passageways, with depths reaching up to 91 meters. The cave floor is covered in thick layers of fine silt, and even more deadly than the depth is the fact that this is a completely enclosed environment. If something goes wrong, you cannot simply swim upward to escape. Your only path to survival is following the guideline all the way back out. One wrong turn down here can become a death sentence. On June 12, 2004, 36-year-old John Robinson and 44-year-old Craig Simon parked their car beside Eagle's Nest sinkhole. Both men were highly experienced divers. Robinson was an electrical engineer at Raytheon and held a master's degree. After discovering diving while studying at University of Florida in the 1990s, he became completely obsessed with cave diving. He treated his diving gear with almost obsessive perfectionism. Every component, every seal, was inspected over and over again. But despite appearing extremely cautious, Robinson had one fatal weakness. He had a history of panic attacks underwater. Before this expedition, Robinson had already gone diving with Simon once before. During that dive, he suddenly fell into extreme panic and completely lost control of both his emotions and movements. In the end, Simon fought desperately to bring him safely back to the surface, saving his life. After that incident, word spread throughout Florida's cave diving community. Almost no diver was willing to dive with Robinson anymore. Simon, meanwhile, was the father of 4 children. He had 22 years of scuba diving experience and had spent 2.5 years cave diving. He was also a certified full cave diver. Among fellow divers, Simon was known as a reliable and cautious dive partner, someone who always left room for safety and strictly followed diving protocols. But Simon's wife was terrified of Robinson. Ever since learning that her husband had once rescued Robinson from an underwater panic attack, she repeatedly warned Simon never to dive with him again. She understood cave diving all too well. One diver's mistake could easily kill both people. Simon had once solemnly promised her that he would never dive with Robinson again. But 1 week before this dive, Robinson came to Simon for help. With obvious frustration, he admitted that nobody in the diving community was willing to dive with him anymore. Simon was the only person left he could turn to. He begged for one more chance. In the end, Simon's loyalty and compassion got the better of him. He broke the promise he had made to his wife and agreed to dive with Robinson once again. At exactly 1 p.m., after completing their equipment checks, the 2 men entered the water. Using underwater scooters, they planned to explore the downstream tunnels of Eagle's Nest sinkhole. The dive plan called for 40 minutes underwater, with the total dive time reaching roughly 2.5 hours after decompression stops. To prepare for the expedition, they carried extensive equipment, multiple high-pressure cylinders, carefully blended tri-mix gases, and enough breathing supply to complete the entire dive safely. The first half of the dive went smoothly. They successfully entered the massive ballroom chamber, paused briefly to admire the cavern, then continued into the downstream main passage, heading deeper into the cave system. Beyond the ballroom, the tunnel initially stretched out gently, but soon began sloping sharply downward. The once enormous passage suddenly narrowed, from dozens of meters wide to barely a meter across. This tight section, known among divers as the pit, was the only route deeper into the cave, and one of the most dangerous areas in all of Eagle's Nest. Still, Simon and Robinson pressed on. Relying on their underwater scooters, they carefully descended through the narrow corridor, until they finally reached the downstream core chamber, Jim's room. At this point, most of their planned route had already been completed. According to the dive plan, they would rest briefly here, then turn around and follow the guideline back, leaving themselves enough gas and time to complete decompression safely. But at that very moment, Robinson quietly changed direction. Near the bend, he had noticed a tiny side chamber, a dead-end passage with no exit, its floor covered in thick layers of silt. It looked insignificant, just another small branch off the main tunnel. But staring into that dark, unexplored space, Robinson became overwhelmed by curiosity. Without informing Simon, he broke away from the main route and entered the side chamber known as John's Pocket. In cave diving, one of the most important safety rules is that before entering an unexplored area, a diver must lay a personal guideline to guarantee a safe return path. But Robinson ignored all of it. The moment he entered John's Pocket, the rapidly spinning propeller of his scooter, combined with the movement of his fins, instantly disturbed centuries of settled silt on the cave floor. Within seconds, the entire chamber became engulfed in sediment. The once clear water turned completely opaque. His dive light illuminated nothing, except a wall of white haze. Visibility dropped to zero. He instantly lost all sense of direction. He could no longer even locate the entrance he had just swum through. Even worse, Robinson already had a history of underwater panic attacks. Now trapped in absolute darkness, inside a confined underwater chamber, his emotions completely collapsed. His mind went blank. His breathing spiraled out of control. The gas supply that should have lasted 2.5 hours began disappearing rapidly. Under frantic, desperate breathing, he threw away his underwater scooter and started wildly thrashing around the tiny chamber, trying to find a way out. But the more he struggled, the more silt he stirred up, and the more silt filled the water, the more hopelessly lost he became. Meanwhile, Simon had no idea any of this was happening. He reached the planned turnaround point, but when he turned around, Robinson was gone. At that moment, Simon faced the cruelest life-or-death decision in cave diving. According to the golden rule of cave diving safety, if your dive partner disappears, and your remaining gas has already dropped below 1/3, the correct and only decision to save your own life is to immediately follow the guideline out and never go back to search. Surely, the promise he made to his wife crossed his mind, but in the end, he still chose to search for Robinson. That decision would ultimately trap him as well. As Simon swam rapidly through the passage, he stirred up even more silt. The already deteriorating visibility quickly collapsed. Soon, he reached the area near the entrance to John's Pocket. But by then, the entire entrance had been swallowed by the massive silt cloud Robinson created. Simon could no longer see the opening. He could not find Robinson. And even worse, inside the murky water, he himself drifted away from the main guideline. Now he was trapped in the exact same nightmare. He was lost too. In the darkness and silt-filled water, Simon's breathing became increasingly rapid. He swam frantically, desperately searching for the guideline. But in the chaos, his body became tangled in the cave's permanent guideline. The rope wrapped tighter and tighter around him. The harder he struggled, the tighter it pulled. And with every desperate movement, his gas supply drained faster. Slowly, despair consumed the very man who still might have survived. Meanwhile, after struggling inside John's Pocket for more than 20 minutes, Robinson finally emptied both of his cylinders. Using the last bit of strength he had left, he still failed to find the exit. In the end, he ran out of air completely and was lost inside the cave forever. The support crew waiting on the surface never saw the two divers return. As time passed, a growing sense of dread set in. Realizing something was terribly wrong, they immediately called the police. The local sheriff's department quickly reached out to some of the top cave diving rescue experts in the United States. Among those who rushed to the scene was legendary Paul Hindered, one of the most experienced divers ever to explore Eagle's Nest sinkhole. He had been exploring the cave system since the 1970s, and was also Simon's cave diving instructor. But after the two divers disappeared, the cave's silt had already been heavily disturbed. Large sections of the system had near-zero visibility, and the dangers of conducting a night dive made the rescue operation even more hazardous. After hours of searching, the rescuers still found nothing. Early the next morning, Paul Hindered led another team back into Eagle's Nest sinkhole. This time, their mission focused on searching the downstream core area around Jim's room, the deepest point of the divers' planned route. About 20 minutes after entering the water, Paul's dive light suddenly illuminated a figure suspended in the darkness. It was Robinson's body. He was floating near a bend in the passage. His equipment was still completely intact, but both of his cylinders were entirely empty. After recovering Robinson and bringing him to the surface, Paul continued searching for Simon. He carefully searched every corner of the downstream passages, but there was still no sign of him anywhere. It was as if Simon had completely vanished inside the endless underwater labyrinth. By 7 p.m., darkness had fully fallen outside, and after more than 10 hours of continuous, high-intensity diving operations, the rescue team was physically exhausted. To avoid another tragedy, the search operation was forced to stop for the night. The following day, due to sudden heavy rainfall, Search operations could not resume until the evening. Paul Haynerth once again passed through the narrow passage into Jim's room inside Eagle's Nest sinkhole. This time, he decided to continue deeper into the cave. As his dive light swept through the darkness, he finally spotted a figure entangled in the guideline. It was Simon's body. He was found deep in the system, wrapped in the guideline, motionless. After the incident, the Hernando County Sheriff's Office formed a dedicated investigation team to examine the fatal diving accident. A 3-month detailed investigation was conducted, after which an official report was released. The report concluded that the tragedy was an accidental death. The direct cause of death for both divers was drowning due to oxygen deprivation. It also revealed a particularly sobering detail. Toxicology tests on Simon detected traces of cocaine in his system. However, the report did not specify the amount, and it was determined that it played no role in the accident. As of 2026, official records confirm that the total number of fatalities at Eagle's Nest sinkhole has reached 13.